Look at me. No, really, look at me like you would look at a mirror that is not afraid to show the parts you have hidden even from yourself. I can already hear you resisting, tightening your jaw, turning your head slightly away. That little movement, so small, almost polite, is the beginning of a story you've learned to tell yourself every morning, the story of who you think you must be. It protects you. It keeps the world predictable. It keeps you from being seen as messy, needy, or weak. But it also keeps you from being known. This video is not about easy answers or feel-good slogans. It is, instead, an invitation to be discomfort in public, to be honest about the quiet tyranny inside you that shapes your choices, your relationships, your dreams. It is about how fear, thin as a thread and strong as iron, knits the costume you wear into the world. And it is about what it costs to keep wearing that costume. You are not, as a principle, broken. You are trained. You were trained by early whispers, an anxious parent's tone, a teacher's disappointed look, a lover's cold withdrawal. You were trained by the systems around you, school, family, work, social media, that rewarded compliance, visibility without risk, and a kind of sanitized competence. The training is subtle. It rarely screams. It whispers instructions: perform, please, mimic, do not disturb. Over time, those whispers become an inner voice that repeats the same sentences back to you when you are alone: not now. Too risky. Don't be ridiculous. Who do you think you are? Let me tell you a story. There was once a man, simple life, tidy apartment, a job that made sense on paper. At the office he was competent, at parties he was charming in the shallow, practiced way that never required his heart to open. But late at night, when the city thinned and the neon softened into memory, he would sit on the balcony and imagine a different life, one that did not originate in a spreadsheet. He imagined painting, or teaching, or leaving the city to plant something that would grow. One winter, he found a small notebook in a second-hand shop. It had a cracked leather cover and 3 lines of handwriting inside. What would you do if failure were a language that taught you, not a verdict that killed you? He bought the notebook for €2. That question became a mirror he could not avoid. It revealed small, honest embarrassments, a fear of being ridiculous, a terror of being judged, the steady hunger to be recognized for something true rather than useful. He discovered that every time he stepped towards something authentic, called a friend to share an idea, signed up for a class, sent a painting to a local gallery, his chest tightened with shame before it could fill with joy. Why? Because the cost of being seen was not only the risk of failure but the risk of losing the tidy identity he had built. He would have to accept being the author of a life that might not fit other people's praise. He would have to relinquish the safety of being nice and practiced. The most terrifying moment in his life turned out to be the moment when the applause stopped and the real work began. This is where the ancient philosophers meet the living neuron. Plato, in his allegory of the cave, tells us that most people live like prisoners chained to a wall, mistaking shadows for reality. The people in the cave are not merely misinformed, they are habituated. Their minds are trained to read the dim light in ways that make them feel secure. Sometimes we imagine Plato as telling us to break the chains and run toward sunlight. But Plato's real point is Messier: the chains are not just physical, they are cultivated by habit, by the daily choices that teach us to fear the sun. When someone in the cave is dragged toward the light, the pain is real. The eyes tear, the skin hurts, the social consequences are immediate. The one who returns from the sun, if they return at all, often finds ridicule or hostility. Liberation is not a spectacle, it's a slow, costly re-education of the senses. Nietzsche says something harder: become who you are. But Nietzsche's exhortation is not a pep talk. It is a diagnosis. The self you might become is not hiding under some immaculate towel waiting to be discovered like a lost toy. It is forged in tension, made by choosing, failing, and being honest about the cruelty of your own excuses. Nietzsche knew that the abyss inside us can gaze back. He meant that you cannot demand meaning without entering the dangerous space in which meaning might be denied, reshaped, or given back to you by your own hands. And then there's Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, not a philosopher of self-fashioning but a theologian whose ethics were born in the cost of resistance. Under Nazism, Bonhoeffer learned what it means to have an inner conviction that must be acted upon regardless of convenience or safety. He taught that grace is cheap when it costs nothing. Courage, he implied, is cheap when it is only theoretical. Real moral action is messy, often ambiguous, and always terrifying. Real choice has a price tag. To be faithful to your convictions may require you to lose the easy rewards your world offers. All these voices converge on a troubling truth: the modern self is trained to avoid cost, and avoidance becomes its own prison. Here is the uncomfortable twist no one likes to admit: safety can be a form of cowardice dressed in virtue. You may call it prudence, responsibility, loyalty to family expectations; those are honorable words. But when they are used to keep you from the difficult, character-building risks, when they become reasons to defer the small revolutions inside you, they are not virtues, they are weapons you use against yourself. Machiavelli said that rulers must sometimes act as beasts to maintain power. Many of us have internalized a domestic, civilizational version of that dictum. We learn to perform forms of moral behavior while our inner motives become strategies for self-preservation at any cost. We become politicians of the self, calculating the minimal moral amount to keep our conscience unprovoked, keeping our ambitions marketable, polishing what is safe for others to admire. The quiet tyranny inside you thus wears soft clothes. It enforces limits not by decree but by suggestion. Not now, it whispers. Not while you have responsibilities. Not until you find the right time. But the right time is a myth. Rightness is a social sanction. Waiting is often a way of waiting to be less afraid of the judgment we dread. Psychology gives us names: avoidance, learned helplessness, cognitive restructuring. But these labels are helpful only to a point. They can tell you that your amygdala overreacts or that you learned a pattern of safety seeking. They cannot, by themselves, show you the moral cost of staying small. So what would it look like to wake up? It would be less dramatic than you expect, and more radical than you tolerate. It would begin with a small, measured defiance, telling the truth without dressing it in politeness, taking a class that embarrasses you, saying no to one thing to say yes to another. It is made of tiny, accumulative acts that rewire the brain's preference for ease. Consider this: every habit you have is a vote for the type of person you become. You vote with your attention. You vote with your evenings. You vote with whom you spend your free time. The more you vote for comfort, the more the machine inside you builds structures to protect it. The more you vote for honesty, messy, visible honesty, the more you make room for the person who is allowed to make mistakes and to grow. There will be costs. Expect them. The people who loved you for the person you pretended to be may notice your change and be uneasy. Some will accuse you of grandiosity. Others will be relieved. Notably, many of the same people who once praised your competence will resent your subsequent mistakes. Why? Because your change exposes how much they invested in your predictability. Here is the second uncomfortable truth: becoming honest about yourself often means losing people, not because they are bad but because your new edges don't fit the roles they've had for you. This is not always tragic. Sometimes it is necessary. Think of planting. A root needs space to grow. A pot that fits yesterday's plant may choke tomorrow's. Another twist: authenticity is not the same as simple truth-telling. Authenticity is not exclusively an individual proclamation of inner feelings. It is a disciplined practice that recognizes the social dimension of life. When Plato's freed prisoner returns to the cave, he must teach others, but he also learns that there are costs to truth and complexities to persuasion. Bonhoeffer shows that the morally courageous must sometimes act covertly or in contradiction with naive concepts of virtue because the world itself can be corrupt. The lesson: to be honest is to be strategic and courageous. To be honest is to accept that truth sometimes requires prudence, sometimes requires sacrifice, and sometimes requires you to accept being lonely. Here's a small test you can try right now, if you dare. What lies are you telling when you say, "I'm fine"? What stories are you repeating that make others comfortable while suffocating a whisper inside you that wants to scream? There is a difference between protecting others and protecting your image. Identify it. The clarity of that distinction is itself a moral act. Let's speak of desire for a moment. Desire is not merely a yearning for things. It is an engine that can either move you toward life or spin you into fantasy. Freud, with his insistence on unconscious desire, warns that we often rationalize our drives with noble words: duty, honor, reason. Jung warns that the shadow, the parts of us we deny, will not disappear because we ignore it. It will make itself known in disguised forms: addiction, rage, chronic dissatisfaction, or a compulsive reenactment of our wounds. You may tell yourself that your dissatisfaction stems from the world. Often it does. The world is unfair in predictable and cruel ways. But you must also admit what you have given away. Where have you accepted a life of smaller risks to avoid temporary pain? Where have you chosen predictability over passion, safety over meaning? This is not a condemnation. It is an accounting. There is a surprising dignity in taking stock. Bonhoeffer's life teaches us that the moral agent is someone who chooses responsibility even at personal cost. Nietzsche teaches that the creator soul must be willing to suffer for creation. Plato shows that the path to seeing with new eyes is painful and slow. These are not commandments, they are descriptions of what real change entails. Now let me offer you a practice, not a trick or motivational checklist, but a discipline to begin re-education. Name the lie. Once every morning for 30 days, write one sentence that captures a recurring self-deception you notice. Example: I work overtime so people will think I am indispensable. Make it sharp. Make it awkward. There is power in clarity. Choose one small brave act. Something that will feel uncomfortable but is reversible. Perhaps you apply to one creative program, tell one honest truth in a relationship, or call the parent you've been avoiding with an apology. Do it without scripting the outcome. Let the result be data, not destiny. Track the cost and the gifts. After you act, journal 2 lists: what did you lose, and what did you gain? Usually, the losses are immediate and the gains are long-term and subtle. Learn to live with delayed gratification. Learn the grammar of your fear. Notice when fear uses virtuous words to protect you. I can't leave my job because of responsibility often masks fear of poverty, shame, or social disgrace. Translate the virtue into the underlying fear. Then name the specific consequence you fear and whether it is survivable. Often, it is. Find a witness. Choose one person who will ask you hard questions and hold silence when you answer poorly. Accountability is not coercion, it is a mirror with teeth. The practice will not abolish fear. It will teach you to move with fear rather than under it. Let's confront an ugly possibility: some of your virtues are a strategy to dominate others. You might be kind when it guarantees your status and silent when it costs you social capital. Machiavelli reminds us that power often uses moral performance to defend itself. Ask yourself, in which arenas do you perform virtue to protect power, and in which do you practice virtue because the world needs it? There is a difference. The first is narcissism, the second is courage. Another uncomfortable idea: dishonesty toward yourself is sometimes compassionate to others. Wait, hear me. There are moments when telling a child a small lie is kindness. There are moments when keeping a job to pay bills means delaying a dream for a few years because someone else depends on you. The moral map is not always a checklist. We live in systems. Responsibilities bind. The ethical agent must be able to weave prudence and bravery together, not to excise either. So where does that leave you? In the thick of practical paradox. I will close with a story, short, true to the point, and a question that is more a task than a query. There was a woman, a nurse, who had been the anchor of her family for years, caregiving, hosting, smoothing edges so others could function. On her breaks, she wrote pieces of fiction that she hid in a desk drawer. She feared being selfish, her family needed her. One day, after her father's funeral, she opened the drawer and read the stories aloud to no one. She realized that the small narratives she had been hiding were not selfish, they were seeds. She started to read her stories to an online group. Some laughed. Some cried. A few readers paid for a short story. Her husband found out. He was frightened and then surprised. He had loved the woman he married but had never seen the woman who wrote because she had not let herself be seen. He began to ask to hear the stories. She began to accept invitations to read at local cafes. Not every reading was good. Some nights she left feeling ridiculous. She continued anyway. The cost, less time for the neat daily necessities. The gain, a life that had edges again. The last line of her first published short story read, "Fear had been an old blanket." She kept it not because it warmed her but because it made her room look ordered. She folded that line into her notebook and read it whenever she felt compelled to tidy her life for someone else's comfort. Now for the question that is not rhetorical: what blanket do you keep because it makes your life appear ordered? Name it. Write it down. Then, in the spirit of Bonhoeffer's costly grace and Nietzsche's brutal self-creation, ask yourself what you would be willing to lose to be seen. You will not be washed clean by one act. You will not be redeemed by a viral moment. Redemption is civic, it is the slow rebuilding of trust with yourself and with others. You build it by tiny commitments, by honoring the people you are becoming, not merely the roles others have chosen for you. The final uncomfortable truth: you are both more fragile and more durable than you think. Fear can immobilize you, it can also sharpen you. The decision to move in the face of fear is not heroic in the cinematic sense. It is quiet. It is the act of choosing, again and again, the kind of person you want to be when someone is watching and when no one is watching. It is the daily refusal to let your life be defined by the applause of strangers. So when you look in the mirror next, don't ask only, "What if I fail?" Ask instead, "What if the only failure is the life I never risked living?" Let that question live in you for a while. See how it nudges your days. See who shows up for you when you stop performing, and who was only present for your performance. Keep the ones that remain. Forgive the rest. If you want a beginning, start with one small brave act this week. Name one lie, do one thing that scares you, and is reversible, and tell someone who will hold you accountable. Then come back and tell yourself the truth about what changed. We are not waiting for you to become heroic. We are waiting for you to become honest. The world does not always reward that immediately. But the world that needs you, your friends, your children, your work, will recognize it, slowly and with gratitude. Be kind to yourself through the process. Be merciless in identifying the illusions that protect you from pain but also from growth. Remember Bonhoeffer's warning that cheap grace will not suffice, remember Nietzsche's demand that you make yourself, remember Plato's insistence that the sun hurts but also reveals. And finally, remember that the most generous thing you can do for the people around you is to risk becoming the full measure of yourself. The cost will be paid in awkward evenings, in the loss of comfortable roles, and in the reshaping of relationships. The reward, if it is fair to use that word for something so quiet, is a life that no longer requires you to pretend. Don't be the version of yourself you tolerate. Be the one you choose.